and external services. Conforming to these simple rules is not difficult, and it will save you a lot of headaches going forward. In clean architecture, the core business logic is implemented in the entity objects. Entities consist of the critical business rules of the system. For example, prior to creating an order, validating the state of the order, checking that the total price is correct, or checking if the order is in stock are the critical rules that need to run before placing an order. One layer above the entities, you will have use cases, which handles the use cases of a system by orchestrating the entity objects. Use cases harmonizes the entities by calling them in the correct order and to achieve the critical business rules. Besides the critical rules, there could be some application-specific business rules, such as having a discount on an item temporarily or checking if a user doesn't exceed an allowed daily purchase limit. These type of rules should be implemented in the use cases. At this point, I also want to briefly mention domain-driven design next to clean architecture. In the next section, I will cover domain-driven design in detail while implementing the domain layer of the services. Here what I want to show is that the high-level approach is the same in clean architecture and domain-driven design. Both has a domain layer isolated in the core of the system and attaching the lower-level dependencies into it, such as user interface, database, and external services. However, there is a slight difference in the domain core itself. In the clean architecture, we have entities which are the core domain elements and keep the enterprise business rules. One level higher, you see the use cases that keep the application business rules. Use cases are responsible to orchestrate and call the entities as per the use case's requirement. In domain-driven design, on the other hand, we still have the entities that has the core business rules, but this time it has an additional aggregate and aggregate root concepts. An aggregate root is the main entity that orchestrates the core business rule of the current context. This context is called as bounded context. An aggregate is a group of business objects which always need to be in consistent state. Therefore, we should save and update aggregates as a whole inside a transaction. An aggregate root is a class which works as an entry point to your aggregate, and all business operations should go through the root. This way, the aggregate root will make sure that the aggregate is in a consistent state. One layer above the entities, this time in the domain-driven design, we have domain services. This can be thought as the equivalent of use cases if we compare with clean architecture, although conceptually they are not the same. In the domain service, you should have the business logic that spans multiple aggregate roots so that they can be implemented in a single bounded context. A domain service can also include a business logic that doesn't fit to an entity naturally. Additionally, there is application service concepts in domain-driven design. Application service will expose the required business layer methods to the outside using ports. And these ports will be implemented in the domain layer itself. In the application service, we can also have the data mappings, validations, and transaction management. Basically, application service should be responsible to make any data adapter calls and gather the data to pass into domain service and entities. Remember, domain service and entities has the core business logic, and they shouldn't deal with things like gathering data, mapping the data, or validating the data. Those are the responsibility of application service. As you see, there's a slight difference on the implementation of domain logic between clean architecture and domain-driven design. I will be using domain-driven design concepts and namings when I implement the domain logic of the microservices in the implementation sections. Finally, I would like to advise you to read the Clean Architecture book by Robert Martin. This book will give you a deep understanding on how to design a software using clean architecture and hexagonal architecture. Here you see some quotes that I gathered from this book. Great, next lecture we will start designing order microservice using hexagonal architecture. So I will see you in the next lecture.